So just last week, I updated you all on how 32% of renters in the month of July were unable to make their full housing payments on time, and how 5.4 million Americans have gone on uninsurance from February to April, not even including June and July. Well, we've got even more bad news for you all. Unfortunately, the $600 a week stimulus unemployment benefits, the federal enhancement for those benefits, I should say, is set to expire at the end of the month. Now, it's actually even worse than that because technically the unemployments are only paid out on weeks which end in a Saturday or a Sunday, and as you know, the 31st this month is on a Friday. What that means is from Monday to Friday, Monday until the 31st there, the unemployment benefits aren't going to come up at all. The last day for payout is going to be on the 25th and the 26th. So this is a really, really bad situation for a lot of Americans, and indeed for the American economy as a whole, where the $600 checks were really boosting up the economy as much as it could, really propping up the economy when there wasn't a whole lot there. Now, this does come on a day when, fortunately, as I'm recording on Monday, it does look like there's some optimistic trials coming out for the vaccine in terms of the coronavirus from Oxford University, suggesting that there could be a vaccine coming shortly. So that's good news. But overall, when it comes to the economic side of things, this is really, really bad news, because if we want to even be able to gin up the economy once it reopens, we're gonna need to be in a situation where there's already and there still is a lot of money flowing through the economy. And if this is just let to set expire, then it's just going to collapse. It's going to be in a really, really bad situation. And of course, this comes on the heels of what we are looking at right now. When you look at the public polling right now for Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, you can see here in this new ABC Washington Post poll, which came out over the weekend, Joe Biden continuing to dominate over Donald Trump in the national polling average. Now, obviously, some people are, more happy about this than others, but you can see here, this is really a pretty clear situation right now where the American public is really turning on Donald Trump. I mean, you can just see these numbers here, a 55 to 40 point margin. This is the second poll that we've taken a look at on this channel in just the past week, showing a 15-point lead. We saw a Quinnipiac poll that I covered last week talking about how Donald Trump was losing to Joe Biden with a 15-point margin. Well, now we're looking at a situation right now where we have a second poll also showing a 15-point margin. Because a week ago when I talked about that poll, actually it wasn't even a full week ago, but when I talked about that poll, I mentioned that it kind of is a bit of an outlier. The current polling average right now shows Joe Biden with about a 10 or 11 point margin over Donald Trump. Right now, though, we've now seen two polls coming out with Joe Biden with a 15-point lead. Now, again, I don't think that that's going to stick. I don't think it's going to stay. But I do think that it does show that Donald Trump has a lot to show. He's going to have to work really hard if he wants to win re-election. He's going to have to really change the way that he's doing things right now, because clearly what he's doing right now is not appealing with the American public. And I do think that that's going to include in continuing this $600 benefits. I mean, at the end of the day, I said at the beginning of this thing, I think that what we should have done is nationalized wages, like what they did in a number of other countries, paying 70 or 80% of the person's wage, and then have that money basically going through the employer, so that way everyone's basically furloughed and then they have a job to go back to, right? Because it's not just an economic matter in the sense of, I'm trying to figure out how to pay my bills. That's certainly part of it, and that is the case for, what's going on right now for a lot of Americans. But there's also that psychological stress of, I've lost my job and I don't know where I'm going to be able to go back to when this thing is over, right? So there's a psychological stress of kind of uncertainty. I don't know where I'm going to be able to go back to for a job. I don't know when I'm going to be able to get my job back. And that psychological stress no doubt contributes to the overall heightened sort of heightened threat that comes from this economic crisis that we're looking at right now. So I'm going to be honest with you guys. Donald Trump, if he wants to have any chance of getting reelected, he's going to have to not only extend these benefits, but is going to have to think really hard about how he can bring the economy back, and bring back not just the economy, but bring back people's sense of optimism for the future. Because you look at polling right now, and it also shows that Americans are not optimistic about the direction of this country and are not optimistic for the future. And that's a really damning number, especially for an incumbent president like Donald Trump, who talked about, for instance, how he was going to make America great again. So this is a situation right now, guys, where Donald Trump really is I want to be completely fair to Donald Trump here. I'm not saying that he has no chance of winning re-election, but it is clear that if Donald Trump wants to win, the GOP and Donald Trump are going to have to buck their orthodoxy a little bit, right? Because the thing that Donald Trump and the Republicans are trying to run on, the thing that they're trying to do is this idea, well, if we just reopen the economy, then things are going to get back to normal, because that's the only thing that they know how to do. The only thing that they're talking about is reopening the economy. They're not talking about stimulus. They're not talking about different ways of funding people's paychecks to make sure that the everyday worker, that average people can make it through this thing on time, that the average worker can make it through this thing, that the average worker can pay their bills on time, and that psychological stress of, I don't know where my next paycheck is going to come from. I don't know when I'm going to be able to get a job again. That psychological stress is not there, because trust me, guys, people aren't going to be voting for an incumbent president if they don't know where their next paycheck is going to come from. And that's the situation that a lot of Americans find themselves in right now. And so the Republican Party, again, is going to need to buck their orthodoxy a little bit. This is a question of whether or not the Republican Party can be flexible in their orthodoxy, whether or not they can say, okay, well, usually we believe in tax cuts, but in this case and in this instance, it's not going to be the right situation. Because, guys, the economy is a very complicated thing. We can't have our ideology tied up in specific and absolute policies, which is going to be the remedy for all economic solutions. Because, guys, the economy changes, right? Any particular tweak here or there changes the way that the economy is structured. So you have to be able to look at the facts on the ground and say, right now, this policy is good. Right now, that policy is good. An ideology is a system of moral beliefs which informs the things and values which you think are good for a society, for a political institution. But the things and policies which work in a particular instance to fulfill those moral duties and those moral values that you hold, those facts are going to change. Those particular policies that you think are good are going to change. And right now, what we're seeing from the Republican Party is a general unwillingness to be flexible in the things that they believe in. They say, well, tax cuts, that's the only solution that they're talking about. They're talking about floating a tax cuts for the top 20% of income earners during the pandemic. Guys, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and I think a lot of people understand that, and a lot of people see that. We saw, for instance, Mitch McConnell trying to block Donald Trump's attempt at an infrastructure investment, which I said at the time, I thought that an infrastructure investment, look, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of Donald Trump, but I said that if Donald Trump wants to do an infrastructure investment, and if we're talking about roads and bridges, then I'm on board with that kind of thing. I'm on board with an infrastructure investment, but Mitch McConnell and a lot of members of Congress and the GOP were going to block that, saying that that's not what we're going to be doing. That's too expensive. They started worrying about the price tag of things. Guys, right now is not the time to be worried about the price tag. Right now, we've got to be worried about getting food on the table of everyday Americans. All right, you guys, that's the video. If you liked it, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.